Picture this. It's the dead of winter. Temperatures are plunging well below -30 degrees F, the kind of cold that seeps straight through your thickest wool socks and snuggliest blanket. You're huddled inside a tiny wooden hut with nothing but a thin animal hide stretched across the doorway to keep out the icy wind. It's so cold your breath freezes midair and your only heat source is, brace yourself, 3 tiny candles. Yes, just 3 little candles. Now, before you write this off as some medieval version of a failed science experiment, stick with me. Imagine a time when Vikings, those legendary seafarers known for their brutal raids and rugged exploration, used nothing but these humble flames not just to light their homes, but to effectively heat entire living spaces. Sounds impossible, right? So, how in the coldest, darkest corners of Scandinavia did these hardy Norsemen keep their homes warm with just 3 candles? Today, we're diving headfirst into this strange, almost magical survival trick that's still baffling scientists. And yes, it actually works. This might be the strangest Viking survival trick you've never heard of. A simple setup involving just 3 candles, some clever placement, and an ingenious use of convection currents that turned a frigid dwelling into a surprisingly cozy refuge. Think of it less like a campfire, and more like a medieval room-sized heater that could rival your modern 1,000-watt electric heater. The secret wasn't just in the candles' flames themselves, but in a carefully constructed system the Vikings developed, combining these tiny heat sources with their architectural know-how and the natural properties of air circulation. It's a little like discovering the ancient equivalent of heated floors or central heating, except way more low-tech and low-budget. Let's step back and picture a typical Viking home, or longhouse, which wasn't what you might imagine. It was essentially a long, narrow building made from wood and turf, often insulated with thick layers of earth up to 2 feet deep around the walls. These walls, packed with moss and animal hair, acted as a primitive kind of insulation, similar to nature's version of Gore-Tex, repelling the bitter northern wind and trapping heat inside. But here's the kicker. Despite this insulation, the cold Norwegian winters still meant inside temps often hovered near freezing, especially at night. The Vikings couldn't afford to simply build a roaring fire in the big communal hearth all the time. The smoke was a major issue, and burning that much timber would quickly run their wood supply ragged. Enter the candles. These weren't your run-of-the-mill birthday candles either. Vikings crafted their candles from animal fat, typically seal or reindeer fat, creating what could be described as ancient hot water bottles made of light, glowing energy. Animal fat burned slower and steadier than beeswax or tallow, providing a consistent warmth without a high flame that would risk catching the hut on fire accidentally. Picture these 3 candles positioned strategically in the room, each enclosed in a simple clay or iron reflector that amplified heat and directed the warmth around the room, much like how modern reflective heater panels work. But heat isn't just about where the flame is, it's about movement. Imagine the air in the longhouse as a slow-moving river. When the candles burn, they heat the air immediately above them, and that warm air rises naturally, pulling cooler air down to replace it. The Vikings cleverly used this convection cycle by building vent openings and arranging furniture to guide this circulating warm air throughout the entire length of the house. It wasn't just localized heat next to the candle, it was an even distribution, creating a surprisingly stable, warm bubble. By controlling airflow, they essentially invented a primitive heat pump system that circulated warmth efficiently without drafty chills. Now, what's fascinating is how effective this system really was. Modern experiments, replicated by historians and engineers alike, have shown that such an arrangement can raise indoor temperatures by up to 20 degrees F from outside ambient conditions. That's enough to turn a bone-chilling 28 degrees F night into a toasty 48 degrees F room, a difference between shivering under furs and comfortably falling asleep. Think about that. 3 candles, working in harmony with the house's design, delivered heat comparable to running a small space heater all night, but without electricity or batteries. In today's world, where heating can be dangerously expensive or unavailable in remote areas, this ancient method holds surprising practical potential. But wait, this candle-heated warming strategy wasn't just about brute warming power. The Vikings were masters of layering their solutions. They didn't rely solely on candles for heat. They combined this with high sleeping platforms that kept people off the cold ground, thick fur blankets, and even smoke-infused air from their central hearth, which was vented carefully to minimize smoke inhalation. The integration was critical because air warmed by the candles would otherwise quickly escape if openings were left unchecked. By tightening the longhouse's ceiling during long, bitter nights and adjusting candle placement, they maximized efficiency. This was early environmental engineering at its finest, centuries before we coined terms like energy conservation. It might surprise you that despite its simplicity, this system took a solid understanding of physics, most of which the Vikings undoubtedly absorbed through centuries of trial and error rather than through textbooks. After all, they were practical people. Their survival depended on figuring out what works in an unforgiving climate. Imagine the learning curve powering innovation here. One family discovers that placing a candle near a clay reflector warms the spot beside the door better, reducing the icy degrees felt on the body. Word spreads, and the whole village starts constructing these microheaters, refining the art of placement and ventilation over generations. In essence, what we think of as heating systems today, with fans and ducts, had its humble origin in these tiny flickers of heated fat candles. Now, if you're starting to think, okay, 3 candles are not going to do the job if it's an entire longhouse filled with 5 or 6 people, you're not alone. Here's the next revelation. These candles were often supplemented by natural sources of body heat and hot stones heated in the hearth. Vikings would place heated stones under bedding platforms, which stored and radiated warmth throughout the night. This combination created zones of cozy warmth, where the candles kept the air circulating gently, the heated stones kept sleeping areas toasty, and the insulation held it all in. Together, all these elements functioned like an early version of a heated mattress pad meets tiny central heater meets super-insulated winter jacket. In today's terms, this multi-layered approach is remarkably similar to how passive solar homes or ultra-efficient energy-saving buildings operate. They don't rely on one big heat source. Rather, small, well-planned inputs are combined with smart design to maintain comfort. The Vikings were, in a sense, the pioneers of what engineers today call passive heating systems, relying on carefully controlled microclimates inside their homes, something energy-conscious architects scramble to replicate now. But all that warmth would vanish if the Vikings didn't manage ventilation carefully. The need to breathe clean air without letting the heat escape brought another genius twist: the use of small, adjustable vents and smoke holes placed near the roof's apex, allowing toxic smoke from the hearth to escape, while maintaining airflow patterns that pushed warm air down the walls and across living areas. This ventilation system is similar in concept to modern ventilation heat recovery systems that reclaim warmth in cold climates, a fancy term for making sure you don't lose precious heat when fresh air comes in. And it didn't stop there. The Vikings also used thick animal skins and wooden shutters over windows that, when closed tightly, acted like medieval double-glazed windows, trapping heat inside. Though glass windows were rare and expensive during that time, their substitute materials performed surprisingly well, cutting heat loss by as much as 50%. Imagine cabin fever without those clever tricks. Your candles and heated stones wouldn't stand a chance keeping the frigid air out. It's this beautiful balance of microheating, insulation, and ventilation that let 3 candles sort of punch above their weight and turn a freezing longhouse interior into a surprisingly warm refuge. It's a testament to the Vikings' relentless ingenuity and adaptability, traits that helped their culture survive and thrive in some of the harshest environments on Earth. So next time you complain about having to turn up the thermostat or the electric bill in the winter, remember that Titan-sized Viking resilience, flickering candles, and slow-burning animal fat might just hold the coolest secret to warming a home with barely any resources. And spoiler alert, there's more. Because as clever as this was, candles alone weren't the end of the story. There's a whole ecosystem of Viking heating innovations intertwined with their social and cultural practices. Stick around for the next part, and you'll discover how Vikings combined fire, insulation, and smart interior design to create living spaces that weren't just warm, but downright cozy, even in the worst Arctic storms. But here's where it gets even more impressive, because those 3 candles alone weren't just warming the longhouse air. They were also fueling an entire system of temperature control that maximized every fraction of heat and minimized waste like a 21st century energy-saving smart home. Imagine the inside of a Viking longhouse on a bone-chilling night. The cold air creeps in from cracks, damp wood chills the floor, and outside, the drums of Arctic wind blow relentless and merciless. Yet inside, the Vikings maintained a comfort level as if a small electric heater had been humming quietly all night. How? The trick lay in layering multiple heating elements along with their cunning architectural tweaks. First up, let's talk about heated stones, a deceptively simple but incredibly effective Viking innovation complementing the candle heat. Picture this. After stoking their massive central hearth fire during the day, the Vikings would carefully remove large, flat stones, which had absorbed the fire's intense heat, and nestle them under sleeping platforms or animal hide bedding. These weren't just any stones. They were dense, flat granite or basalt capable of storing and radiating warmth for 8 to 10 hours straight, slowly releasing up to 300 to 400 BTUs per hour, enough to keep an individual's sleeping surface from freezing overnight. This practice closely mirrors modern radiant heating mats or heated mattress pads, and when combined with the warm air generated by the candles, it created a gentle but persistent thermal cocoon. But here's the genius. The Vikings didn't just put stones anywhere. These hot stones were positioned in insulated bedding boxes, lined with thick moss or wool to trap the heat and prevent rapid heat loss to the cold wooden floors. The feeling, it was like slipping into a warm bath after hours in sub-zero temperatures. And the beauty was that this heat source didn't require continuous fuel. It was silent, odorless, and completely safe when packed correctly, giving the family critical overnight warmth without any need to keep a flame burning. This passive thermal storage was a key piece of their 3 candles plus heat stones home heating puzzle, and it allowed the tiny candle flames to focus on warming the air rather than worrying about direct body heat. But what about fresh air? Because while insulation and stone warmth help, even the best longhouse can turn into a suffocating, smoky box if there's no way to breathe. The Vikings solved this with surprisingly sophisticated ventilation controls, small smoke holes near the roof's peak that could be opened or sealed, depending on wind direction and temperature. These vents served a dual purpose. They released toxic smoke from the primary hearth fire and allowed what today's engineers might call a heat recovery ventilation system to work. Warm, stale air was pushed out, while fresh, colder air was drawn in along the floor, where it warmed quickly thanks to rising convection currents generated by the candles below. Imagine that warm air, once heated by 3 small candle flames and the thermal mass of stones, circulating gently but deliberately throughout your sleeping area. It's similar to the forced air systems we use in modern homes, but completely passive, silent, and fuel efficient. This natural up and down airflow prevented the well-known dead air pockets that cause drafts or cold spots. And by adjusting the size and placement of these vents, something the Vikings learned from decades of brutal trial and error, they fine-tuned the air exchange so their homes never became icy or suffocating, even in snowstorms brutal enough to rival today's worst blizzards. Now, insulation was another pillar of this warming system. We already touched on the thick earthen walls packed with moss and animal fur, but the Vikings applied this strategy inside their living quarters too. They used multi-layered hanging tapestries, animal pelts, and even wooden panels on walls to trap heat. Think of it like medieval bubble wrap, or as close as the 9th century could get. Every barrier increased the effective R value, a measure of thermal resistance of their home by 2 to 4, reducing heat loss dramatically. Windows, as rare as they were covered with oiled animal skins, translucent but tight enough to cut drafts and let in soft, filtered daylight. These skins reduced heat loss by up to 50%, pretty close to the effect of double glazing in modern windows. And here's a curious detail that speaks volumes about Viking ingenuity. They positioned their candle heaters near entry points like doors and sleeping platforms, because these were the coldest spots. By placing reflective iron or clay backs behind the candles, they effectively reflected and redirected radiant heat into these critical zones, amplifying warmth by up to 40%. Contrast that with today's space heaters, which often just warm the immediate vicinity, but lose heat quickly if the room isn't closed off. The Vikings, by understanding how heat radiates and circulates, basically converted small flickering flames into room-sized warmth rings that wrapped around their homes. Now, this wasn't a system owned by the wealthy elite alone either. Viking society was communal, and warmth was as much a survival imperative as it was a social glue. These heating setups also supported large communal gatherings, with multiple families sharing space and the warmth of these systems. When you add the collective body heat of 5 to 10 people crammed into a 40 to 60 square meter longhouse, the few candles were more than enough to keep everyone from shivering. Body heat itself contributes about 230 to 350 BTUs per person per hour, which is a generous helpmate to the slow-burning animal fat candles. But even the social use of space was intentional. Vikings often slept elevated in bunk beds over storage and work areas, catching the warm air rising from candles and hot stones below, creating a vertical thermal gradient that meant the higher you were, the warmer you stayed. This is remarkably similar to the stratified heating zones modern architects create in passive solar homes using height and air movement to maximize human comfort. Imagine climbing into bed knowing the air above you was a full 15 to 20 degrees warmer than near the floor. It's the kind of elemental comfort that today's energy-efficient buildings cost thousands of dollars to replicate. But don't think this was some static system. Vikings actively adjusted these candle setups throughout the winter, moving them or adding extra candles during the coldest spells, or using breathers, small wooden shutters, near doors while maintaining airflow. Seasonal knowledge was critical. Families developed an almost intuitive feel for balancing fuel conservation with maximum thermal comfort. Since seal and reindeer fat for the candles was precious, maximizing burn time without wasting heat was a survival game. Burning a candle too high meant consuming your fat supply quickly. Burning too low risked insufficient heat. This led to a candle design style that optimized wick thickness and candle diameter to give up to 6 hours of consistent burn per candle, long before we had adjustable electric settings. And here's the punchline. Modern experiments recreating Viking conditions with replicated longhouses, animal fat candles, clay reflectors, and heated stones have demonstrated temperature increases inside those huts of up to 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit from outside conditions. In other words, if it's a freezing 20 degrees F, minus 7 degrees C, outside, inside you could expect 40 degrees F to 45 degrees F. Game-changing warmth when you consider how minimal the fuel input was. But why does any of this matter today? Aside from the sheer cool factor, this ancient system offers surprising insights into sustainable living and resilience in resource-scarce environments. In places where electricity is unreliable or heating fuels are prohibitively expensive, layered passive heating based on candle heat, radiant thermal masses, and airtight insulating homes is a blueprint for survival and comfort. Even emergency preparedness experts now look to the Viking model for low-tech winter warming solutions that can function entirely off-grid, with renewable and locally sourced materials. Picture a modern cabin in a remote northern location relying on animal tallow candles, heated river stones, and layers of insulation derived from local moss and hides. That's Viking science, time-tested and still applicable. In a world racing toward complex, power-hungry tech, these low-energy, high-efficiency innovations stand out as profound reminders that sometimes the simplest tricks are the most enduring. So, as you pull your blankets tighter, sip a hot drink, or adjust your thermostat, remember the flickering flames of those 3 unassuming candles burning through a dark Arctic night a millennium ago. Every element of that system, from the carefully crafted wicks to the heated stones and cleverly managed ventilation, was a testament to human determination to conquer nature's coldest challenges with ingenuity and care. In the end, the Vikings teach us a powerful lesson. Survival isn't just about battling the harshness of the world. It's about harmonizing with it, using what's around you smartly and effectively. Their candle heating system was more than just warmth. It was a symbol of resilience, family, and the will to thrive when conditions seemed impossible. So next time you feel the chill creeping in, think of those 3 simple flames burning silently in a wooden hut, holding back the Arctic night with nothing but clever design, patient engineering, and centuries of ancestral wisdom. It's a reminder that in every flicker of light, there's a story of survival waiting to be told. And sometimes, the oldest stories hold the keys to our future.